On your Monday episode of Locked On Raptors, the Toronto Raptors have already done most of their offseason work with the Brandon Ingram trade, but what else do they need to really complete this puzzle?
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday, May the 5th, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 11 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on Blue Sky. You can find the show on Instagram, and you can join us in the Locked On Raptors Discord server. Link in the description of the podcast. Come hang out. Be part of our listener community. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. And we're off and running here in your Monday edition of the show, 1 week out from the draft lottery, the day we've all had circled on our calendars for quite some time now. And we'll still do some draft talk throughout the week, talk about some guys who may not be there if the Raptors don't get themselves some lottery luck in a week's time. But before we do that, I want to take a sort of 10,000 foot view of the Raptors offseason and what it is they still need, whether it's through the draft, via trade, free agency, whatever it might be, to really assemble a roster that can go and fulfill what seems to be the goal for next year, which is compete and try to make the playoffs and power out of this rebuild in short order. We'll get into my thoughts on the need for a backup big man. We'll get into roster balance, but off the top, I want to dive into what I think is the single biggest need for this team. And I don't even know if it's necessarily a dire need for next year as far as fulfilling the goals. But if you're talking about 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line as the Raptors look to become contenders one day, the number one need for me, it would be great if they could address some way this offseason. We'll get into some ways that they could maybe do that and how dire this need might be, but it's elite shot creation and shot making, or at least better shot creation and shot making than this team already has. Last year, the Raptors were an elite shot quality team that was near the bottom of the league and actually making shots. It's tough. Number 4 in location effective field goal percentage, which is the expected field goal percentage you'd expect based on where the Raptors took their shots. If an average player was taking all of those shots, they were 23rd in actual effective field goal percentage, bottom 10 in shooting from every spot on the floor, at the rim, short mid-range, long mid-range, three-pointers, corner threes, above the break threes, all of it. The Raptors were bottom 10 in all those departments and actually finishing the shots that they took. This is the big issue that they went out and addressed with Brandon Ingram, right? This was, I think, a big impetus for why they made this trade. The information they got about the team this year was, yeah, these guys, the offense is just not quite working. We can't get enough over the finish line with the dudes we have in-house. We need more. And so they went and got more for a pretty low price. And Brandon Ingram figures to be a big part of addressing this overall problem for the Raptors. And, you end up with yourself having a trio of Emmanuel Quickley, Brandon Ingram, and Scottie Barnes, who figured to be the 3 lead creators for the team next season. Is that enough to win a championship? I do not think that is enough to win a championship, but I do think it's enough to be competitive and, again, kind of satisfy the goals for competitiveness that this team seems to want to have going into next year. But you can always use more. And if you do have designs on this team one day becoming an inner circle title contender, there just is going to have to be more shot creation, whether it's stuff that develops internally. Maybe Emmanuel quickly makes a massive leap. That would be huge. Maybe he figures out how to score at the rim through contact. That would be outstanding. Maybe Jakob Poeltl makes a big jump. Maybe not for next year, but 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line. Maybe you're looking at Walter as a guy who has some creation juice for you, some pull-up shooting juice, which is another thing this team badly needs, kind of tied into all of this, is pull-up shooting, man. Emmanuel Quickley, kind of the only credible pull-up threat on the team. Ingram figures to be next season one of those types of guys as well, whether it's from mid-range or from three-point range. Pull-up juice, wherever you have it, is always welcome. Walter, I think, has a chance to be something like that as well as time goes on. But again, you can always use more. Again, I don't think the need is like super dire DEFCON 1 for next year. I think they'll have enough to scrape by a pretty decent offense with the guys they have and just the depth that they're going to have, right? I think they'll have, a higher shooting quotient than they've had in years past with Ingram coming into the mix. Hopefully a healthy quickly. You get Jakob Poeltl's 3-point shooting. And again, he was very good in the back part of this season, the back 80% of his rookie season. He was lights out, 39% from deep. Grady Dick. What am I talking about? Grady Dick, I think, has a real chance of getting up to the 3-point clip that we think he's capable of in a less demanding role, right? As a rookie, he was obviously not ready physically for the league, and he ended up being a 36% 3-point shooter as a rookie. Last year, in particular, at the start of the season, he was just overtaxed, overburdened, took incredibly difficult shots that were not created with a whole lot of ease, and it ended up, he kind of burned out as the season went along, and the legs went on the shot, and it got ugly by the end. He finished at about 35% once again. I do think in a less burdensome role, Grady Dick has a chance to offer a ton of shooting and space and gravity and all the stuff that this team badly needs. Ochai Agbaji, Jamison Battle, these guys can shoot. Maybe Jamal Shed continues to make some strides in that department. I don't think they're going to be totally bereft of 3-point shooting, but all that 3-point shooting becomes a lot more effective and helpful when you have actual creators getting into the teeth of the defense, making stuff happen, putting teams in rotation, and all of a sudden you're creating really good shots via those lead creators. So how do they address it? I mean, the first thing is you get lucky as hell in the draft, right? If you move up on lottery night in a week's time and you get one of Cooper Flagg or Dylan Harper, that could be your long-term fix right there. Cooper Flagg maybe has a little further to go to be like a lead offensive engine type creator, though I do think that's within his range of possibilities. Dylan Harper, maybe that's more sort of his classic style, as a guy who gets to the rim a ton, can play make out of that, score all of it. We'll see about the pull-up shooting from him. That's a real concern. Beyond those guys, maybe you're taking a swing at a guy like Jeremiah Fears, or, I know some people like Jace Richardson as a guy like this as well. I'm not super high on Jace Richardson myself, but, I'd much rather Fears if I'm taking an upside swing on a smaller guard. But like, that's a way you could go about addressing this concern as well. Obviously, the way that this franchise tends to operate, a real way they could go do this, is via trade as well. And that's where the Giannis thing comes into the conversation, right? Like, Giannis would be kind of answer number one to this problem. You want a guy who can create a look on his own. Giannis is that guy. He obviously can just kind of get to the rim at will because he's the strongest man alive with these big bounding steps. He's incredible at that. And he's also become just like an absolute wizard in the mid-range. This season in particular, he was unbelievable from mid-range. And I think he would satisfy the need for a shot creator. We know he can create for others as well. Perennially 6-7 assists a game, all of that. I think obviously like that's like if you're thinking of ways to go and address it, finding a way to get Giannis on the team, whatever it takes, is way number one and option number one if that can happen. But again, like, it's going to be hard to make it happen. There's going to be a bidding war for Giannis. The Raptors might not have the juice compared to some of these other teams. They certainly don't have the juice when it comes to draft picks that might be attractive to the Milwaukee Bucks that, say, Houston would, with all those Suns picks sitting there. The Thunder obviously have a bazillion picks. The Spurs have, not a bazillion picks, but some picks. There are some teams that can get in the mix. The Brooklyn Nets as well, another one. We're not going to relitigate it. You can go listen to last week's show when I talked about what it would take to get Giannis and, how the Raptors will have to come correct if they really want to do it. But that's job number one or answer number one to this question of shot creation this summer. All the more likely outcomes come in behind that. And again, that's where trade is maybe less of a possibility than just kind of using the draft to try to take an upside swing on a creative type. But trade's always going to be an option. Maybe not this summer, but the summers beyond. We know this front office is constantly probing and looking and trying to be opportunistic. We don't know when a big-time shot creator will come available. We don't know who that will be, what position they'll play, all of that, how serious the Raptors might be able to get, or how serious they will be about getting said guy whenever that guy, whoever it is, becomes available. But we know that they'll be ready, and they'll throw their name in the ring if they're close to being in the conversation. And so I do think, like, long term, as much as they could totally get lucky in the draft and things change in a week from now if they jump up to 1 or 2, I think the most likely way that they go about adding a lead shot creator to this team is probably via trade, and probably not this summer. And again, I don't think that can be a thing that derails next season at all. The next season can still go off without a hitch, can still be a successful step forward. They can still make the playoffs with the team that they have. But if you want to have designs on like deep playoff contention, second, third round runs, you want to get to the Pacers tier, you got to have a little bit more in terms of shot creation. And that's going to be the big question for the next couple of years to see how they find it. And again, it could happen internally, right? Like maybe Scottie Barnes figures it all out. Maybe Brandon Ingram just is enough to unlock this whole team, maybe quickly take some steps and sort of through a collection of pretty good like B tier creators, you have yourself an offense that hums beautifully because you have all these guys who can create advantages and kind of layer them on top of one another over the course of 24 seconds in a shot clock. But obviously, if you can get a guy who just is a cheat code, who's a walking creative shot guy right away, then yeah, that would be pretty darn swell. We'll see if they can pull that off this summer or at some summer in the future. We'll come back on the other side and get into what I think a lot of Raptors fans would say is the biggest need for the team. I'm a little bit less sold that this is need number one to go fulfill, though I do understand the case. We'll get into that coming up in just a sec. Talk about big men. Today's show is brought to you by BetterHelp. And the world has made a lot of progress when it comes to mental health. There's still a long way to go, though. Too many people still avoid therapy because they're afraid of being judged. The truth is, taking care of your mental health should be just as normal as going to the gym or eating healthy. This is Mental Health Awareness Month. Let's normalize getting help and encourage everyone to prioritize their well-being, because when people feel supported, families, workplace, and entire communities are better for it. I am someone who, goes to therapy. It's great. I recently kind of dipped my toes in the waters because I'm having a kid soon, and it felt like a good place to sort of talk out my concerns and fears and reservations, and just to make sure I'm in the right place to be a dad when that time comes. And I got to say, it's been really helpful. It's nice just having someone to talk to throw things off of, and get feedback and help me kind of form who I want to be. It's a lovely thing. I know a lot of people who have benefited from therapy as well. We're all better with help. Visit betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Back at it here on your Monday edition of Locked On Raptors, digging into the basic needs of the Toronto Raptors, the hierarchy of needs, if you will, going into this summer. And again, most of what the Raptors have done, like what they have to do, I guess, is done, right? Like this roster is mostly going to be set for next year. There's not going to be a huge free agent play, one would think. There's not probably going to be a massive trade, though, again, always a possibility with this front office. There's still some stuff they got to sort out if they want the team to be fully optimized for what they're trying to accomplish next year. And I think if you ask like 1,000 Raptors fans, Family Feud style, what's the biggest need for this Raptors team? I don't know if it would be number one, but it would certainly be close. I think backup big man would be quite near the top of the list. And, this is just based on, having my fingers in all kinds of cookie jars when it comes to Raptors internet. I kind of see, I think, a lot of opinions across the board. And it seems like there's a growing consensus that a backup big is like a dire need for this team. I'm a little torn on this one, honestly. And I talked about it a little bit, but it's for a couple reasons. I've said it before, but I think backup bigs are the single most overrated position in the sport in terms of like the value they provide, the impact they have on the overall quality of a team. And it's mostly because backup bigs are kind of bad. They're very replaceable. It's a skill set you can typically find. And the guys who have like really unique skill sets, helpful, valuable skill sets, you're not picking them up off the scrap heap in free agency. They are locked in with their teams in most cases because they're damn important in the modern NBA. And so, if you're kind of wading into the waters of your Orlando Robinsons of the world, your Alex Len's, if that is your sort of backup big pool that you're playing in, I just don't think you're finding anyone in there who's terribly helpful, terribly meaningful, or impactful to getting the most out of your roster over the course of a full season. Those guys can be cycled in and out. Those guys are a dime a dozen, not to sound dismissive because they're all NBA players with very high skill degrees and all of that. But like the bar to be in the NBA is higher than it's ever been. And I find backup big men are backup big men for a reason. Like it's hard to stay on the floor in the NBA. And if you have skill sets that make you viable for more minutes, you're just not going to be eminently available because it's a scarce supply. Like finding shooting bigs is a difficult thing. Everyone could use more shooting from their bigs, not everyone can get it because there's not that many guys alive who have that skill set to play at the NBA and so at the NBA level. And so that's kind of the one reason I'm a little like, yeah, backup big would be nice, but like, who are you reasonably getting that actually changes your life? Probably not a whole lot. And there's also just, I'm a big believer in Scottie Barnes at the 5. I think this can work. I think he's shown a capacity for it. His second season in particular, he played a lot at the 5 before they got Jakob Poeltl, and there was some really successful moments of that taking place. And even if the team wasn't very good individually, I thought his best moments as a second-year player, where there were plenty of struggles, came when he was playing as a small ball 5. I think he's just, and what he's done defensively, the jump he's made on that end, I think makes him even more viable as a backup 5 now than he was maybe a couple of years ago. I think, you know, it's tough because you're trying to balance things too, right? Like the big reason to want a backup big behind Jakob Poeltl, aside from like having like a succession plan going forward for a guy who's in his 30s and maybe isn't going to be around for too much longer. You know, maybe they keep him around, they extend him. I think he's extension eligible this summer. Maybe they keep him around even longer. That would be awesome. I would love to see that for Jakob Poeltl and for the Raptors. I think he's a very nice player to have around. But I can see the argument for wanting like a long-term succession plan behind him. And we'll get into how the draft can kind of be a way that they can go and achieve that. But when it comes to like the actual viability of the team next season, I don't think it's worth devoting like enormous resources to a backup center when Scottie Barnes is probably the guy you're going to want soaking up those minutes ahead of whichever backup you get anyway. You know, there are some limiting factors to that. We'll get into it in the final segment when we talk about roster balance. There's only so many ways you can play with this team as currently constructed, and the lineups maybe are a little small or they skew that way if Scottie Barnes is your 5. You know, again, there are ways to go and address that and balance the roster out to make those lineups a little longer, a little beefier, a little more able to withstand not having a traditional center on the floor. But like, yeah, I think where the need for like a Poeltl, the classic center backup comes in is if he's going to miss a lot of time, which, hey, if he's going to miss a lot of time, you're probably screwed anyway, because you can't really afford any of your key guys missing huge long stretches of time. Maybe it's a little more forgiving in the Eastern Conference than it would be at West. But yeah, like if Poeltl's going to miss 10 games, I feel like you can get by with Scottie Barnes filling in and Jonathan Mobo filling in, and you just kind of make it work for 10 games. Lots of teams stitch together weird lineups for brief portions of the schedule to account for injury. And I do think they're deeper than they have been in recent years and probably more able to do that. You know, the concern becomes, does he miss 20 or 30 games? Does the team lose all functionality without him? You know, that's been the case over the last couple seasons. I think with a deeper team and playing Scottie at the 5, you can probably account for that a little bit and not be the total disaster they were when they were like, you know, what was it, 4-28 without Jakob Poeltl back in 2023-24. They were a little better this year because they played, you know, frankly, a cream puff schedule down the stretch when he was sitting a lot and kind of boosted their numbers there. But yeah, like that's the concern. If you miss Jakob Poeltl, who had the best on-offs on the team this year by far, once again, if you miss him for 20 or 30 games, does that sewer your entire season if you don't have a ready-made classic backup center to fill in? It could not. It depends on the quality of the backup you have, obviously, too, right? Are you going to throw a rookie into that spot and expect great results? Probably not, because that's a lot to ask of a rookie, be it Kaman Malawach or Derek Queen or Azanul. Like, we'll get into those guys as well in a sec here, too. But yeah, what I actually think is the more pressing need than like a pure bona fide backup center is some diversity in their front court skill sets. Basically, can you get someone who plays either the 3 or either the 4 or the 5? I don't really care if they're traditional 5. Someone who can play in the front court who's like 6'9" or taller, who can change up the skill sets you have in that front court. What are they missing right now in the front court? It's shooting. They need someone with stretch. And if that comes in the form of a 6'9" guy versus a 7'1" guy, then I don't think you're really too worried about the distinction. You're just looking for more diversity in skill sets. Again, these types of guys can help you elongate lineups, survive minutes with Scottie at the 5, which I think he should be playing a lot of. Scottie plus shooting and screening and diving has always been very good. But if you can get someone who can properly space around him, that's awesome. That would be wonderful. I don't care if he's a power forward or a center or even like a 3-4 hybrid type. As long as you can elongate your lineups a little bit, I think it kind of fits the bill. You know, can you poach a guy that's about to get expensive? Can you poach a guy that, you know, from a team that's about to get expensive that can't keep all their guys around? You know, I know there's a lot of Jabari Smith Jr. fans among the Locked On Raptors Discord crowd. If you can find a way to get him on a, like a roster balancing trade, sure, that'd be great. You also have to pay him very soon. Can you stomach that? Is that something you want to do? I've mentioned Jalen Williams, the backup big man Jalen Williams for the Oklahoma City Thunder. He's in the same contract situation as Ochai Agbaji going into a final year, extension eligible. That team's really expensive or going to be very expensive very soon. Is that a guy that they're going to be able to keep around long term, or will they just use their sort of horde of draft picks to cycle in and replace that guy for many years to come on sort of a 3 and 4 year cycle? I think that's probably the way they end up going. They're not going to pay everybody. It's OKC. And so can you get a guy like that? Would be awesome. Like, can you pull off a miracle and get yourself someone who really moves the needle, right? A Santi Aldama, a Miles Turner. Like, that's not happening because like the Pacers probably just keep him. But, a Mo Wagner, a Naz Reid, those are the kinds of guys who would really move the needle that you probably don't have the salary flexibility or the stuff to go and get in a trade. The free agent market is pretty lean, right? You've got, again, Aldama's an RFA, probably requires a sign and trade to make that happen. I would love Santi Aldama. So good, such a perfect fit, would fit next to Scottie, not a traditional center, but a Scottie Aldama 4-5 can totally work for you. Again, Mo Wagner, Miles Turner, Naz Reid, those guys are fantastic. They would be great, but they're going to be free agents and you're going to get big bags. They're not going to have the cap space to go make that happen. I don't see a sign and trade that really makes sense unless there's like an RJ Barrett something in there for one of these guys. I don't really know, but it's hard to see. Clint Capella is another one. He doesn't bring stretch, but he's a backup center. Can you get Clint Capella for cheap, or is he going to go somewhere where he can probably start? I think that's probably, he's got Lakers written all over him, for example. Brook Lopez as a backup is kind of interesting. If he's going to walk from Milwaukee, maybe Giannis gets traded. Maybe Milwaukee just moves on and tries to go younger at that spot. Maybe Brook wants to go ring chasing, would be totally fair. Maybe you can offer him like a really nice backup role. He can play behind Jakob Poeltl, give you some space, give you some rim protection. And in the event Poeltl gets hurt, that's like a perfect guy to say, hey, Brook, you're going to start for 20 games now. And you're going to feel probably just fine about that, assuming he's healthy and all of that. And if he's playing backup minutes, he's probably going to be more likely to be healthy than if he were starting and playing 35 minutes like he did for stretches with the Bucks this year. Beyond that, you're looking at guys like Luke Cornett, Thomas Bryant, Kevon Looney in the free agent market. Like, those guys aren't moving the needle for you. I'd much rather just play Scottie at the 5 and devote those resources somewhere else. And you're not even going to have your full mid-level exception to play with here either, right? This is going to be a team that's likely flirting with the tax line. You're not going to be able to throw a full $13 million bag at one of these dudes. You're going to have to say, hey, like, yeah, we have a role for you. It's not a huge role, but you want to come play it for, $5 million, something like that. Maybe that gets it done with a guy like Cornett. Maybe that's exactly what you need, but I think I'd much rather just be, maybe Cornett's a little ahead of the Bryant, Kevon Looney, Alex Len tier. But, again, like Luke Cornett, I maybe just rather have Scottie Barnes play the 5 if I'm being real. The real answer here is the draft, of course. Like, you take one of Kaman Malawach, Derek Queen, or Raza Newell. If Newell probably if you fall down to 8 or 9, I guess. Malawach, I've made it clear. I think he's a top 5 pick in this draft. I think it's silly that he's not being like consensus mocked in the top 5. I don't think there's any way he's not an elite defender in the NBA. And I think at the very least, his rim running and finishing around the rim and lob dunking and all that stuff is going to work beautifully in the NBA if he plays with the right type of players and things like that. And so, yeah, like that's probably the move here. You get one of those young guys in the door. They become your long-term succession plan for Jakob Poeltl. The case of Newell in particular, I think he's got the most upside shooting-wise of these guys. Maybe he is the guy who gives you that stylistic versatility among your bigs, and you have yourself like a 6'10" mobile big who can, hit 35% of his threes playing next to Scottie Barnes, and you feel pretty damn good about that. Either way, there's other ways to do it, right? There could be a surplus for surplus move where you deal a guy in the shooting guard stable for a big. Could make some sense. So we'll actually dig in further into that idea coming up next as we get into the idea of roster balance being a third need for this team this summer. We'll do that to close out the show momentarily. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Monarch Money. You ever look at your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? I do that all the time. Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, and your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control of your finances helps you get a handle on your money. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center, so you can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Look, I'm at a point where I'm spending a lot of money on stuff. We have a baby coming soon, and so we're buying like furniture and buying diapers and all of this stuff. And it's a great way to kind of know where all the money's going and how much we've got left over for things like, food for ourselves and whatnot, just to have all of our accounts in one spot. I have my own work accounts and my wife has accounts, and we have a shared account for our mortgage and all this stuff all in one place with Monarch Money. That command center is great for keeping track of things. And you should go check it out if you are having similar troubles of just kind of trying to keep everything in order with a bunch of different accounts. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDINNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDINNBA for half off your first year. Wrapping it up here on your Monday edition of Locked On Raptors, talking about needs, baby. What do the Raptors need to go and be the team that they want to be next season? And the last need, we've covered the need for shot creation and the new need for some form of big man help, whether it's a stretch 4 or a 5 or combination of both, whatever. Roster balance, I think, is the third thing here. This team just needs more size. And there's a lot of positional overlap right now, specifically in the backcourt at the 2 spot and the 3 spot, I guess. You have not a ton of guys to slide up to the 4 in terms of size. Like a lot of your guys in that 2-3 area are on the smaller side. I suppose you can move Brandon Ingram to the 4 and play Scottie at the 5, and that's not bad. But if you have your 4 and 5 are Brandon Ingram and Scottie Barnes, and then you have guys who are like 6'5" rounding out the rest of the lineup, or shorter than that in the case of Quickly, I think that gets kind of exposed. You got to have more size across the board. You got to be more switchable. And so I do think finding a way to balance this roster a little bit this summer is kind of a big deal if you're trying to optimize what the team can look like next year. We've seen it in the playoffs. I talked about it last week. You got to be able to play multiple ways. You have to have different little tools for different matchups and different, situations. And if you're kind of sitting there with a bunch of guys in the 2-guard spot in particular, RJ Barrett, Jakob Poeltl, Grady Dick, Ochai Agbaji, all of whom have their own little skill sets, and they're all different players. But I don't think there's enough differentiation and not enough defensive juice in particular to make all of those guys you can roll out, with 2 or 3 of them on the floor at the same time. And so with that, I think to just like optimize those roster spots as best as possible, I think it's smart for the Raptors to try to seek out some kind of roster balancing move with one or multiple of those guys. Again, you just have to be able to be a chameleon, play different ways. And though I certainly think the team now has more stylistic versatility than they had maybe like 2 years ago when it was all vision 6'9" and it was their only way to play. Like they can try to mix it up a little bit more now. They have Jonathan Mobo as this long, switchy dude who can play at the 5. You've got Scottie Barnes. Talked about him playing at the 5 plenty. There's some versatility, but I think they could really amp up the different types of styles they could throw out there on given nights against, certain matchups just by figuring out how to sort of turn some of that 2 and 3 stable surplus into some guys in the front court. How dire is this need? Like, again, it's like more of a longer term need than something that'll totally derail them next year. I think they can, again, be totally fine next year with mostly the roster they have right now. The Eastern Conference is not very good. I think they're a much better team on pure talent than the 30 and 52 they were this year. I think they showed that in the second half of the season. March fakeness obviously baked into that, but there was plenty of realness in January and February. And so I don't think this is like you go into next year and you just simply cannot fulfill your attempts at being competitive if you don't find some roster balance here. But I think it certainly makes it easier. And if you get to the playoffs next year, it's really something that will help you maybe have more of a puncher's chance if you're in a series against a heavy favorite. If you're in a 3-6 or something like that, having some more ways to potentially gum up the works in a series and different moves and chess pieces you can play around with. The more optionality you have in a series, the better. Some teams, you see it in the playoffs, right? You just get to the end of the road with adjustments and you just like, oh, well, these are the players we have. We can only kind of play one way. And it works if you have Nikola Jokic as your best player. We just play Jokic ball and it works. Okay, great. That's great. Not everyone has Jokic. In fact, nobody except one team has Jokic. The Raptors certainly don't. And so you got to have more cards in the deck to go and play. You got to come armed with all kinds of different combinations you can throw out there in terms of guys. And so how do they do this? Like, this is the type of trade, again, I think we're most likely to see them make this summer. I think I would way more bank on them making this kind of roster balancing move versus like a big star swing. I think Giannis is the only guy that we'll see them actually, in the mix for if there is like a big star trade to be had, just because of Masai's history of kind of being lusty after Giannis Antetokounmpo more than anything. And also he's just like a full-on game-changing talent, the likes of which probably won't move elsewhere around the league this summer. And so, yeah, if you're looking at possible constructions for trades, Ochai Abaji for a big and a similar, like I think Ochai Abaji for your Jalen Williams type could totally happen, right? Similar contract situations, maybe fits the team a little bit better, though I think Jalen Williams is as helpful to the Thunder as Ochai arguably would be, because Ochai would be like the sixth guy of that size and archetype on that team. 6'5", annoying, shoots well, plays good defense. Like, yeah, they have a million of those guys. And so maybe that's not like a perfect balance for balance, surplus for surplus type thing. But I think there are going to be moves out there where Ochai can be the piece going back. And, it doesn't commit you to crazy long-term money. You got to look at a guy for a year before deciding to pay him, that type of thing. Maybe move on from him. Maybe you don't. But it's a way to just kind of break up the logjam at that 2 spot. I also think, RJ Barrett is the big one, right? If RJ can be turned into a couple of guys who skew a little further up the positional spectrum, I'm not exactly sure what that move is. You got to go and probe and find a team that might be into an RJ Barrett. Maybe they need some juice on the offensive end. Maybe they have enough defensive juice on the other side to, stomach bringing in RJ. I don't know, but that's, I think, the other type of move here. If they are going to make a roster balancing trade, RJ for like a couple of cheaper guys that, again, kind of clears up your longer term books, feels like the move for me. And we can get into some specifics as we go through the offseason, of course, as things get more real and closer to the transaction window. But I would be surprised if all of RJ Barrett, Grady Dick, Jakob Poeltl, and Ochai are on the team next year. I think, maybe surprise is putting it strongly. I would put money on that over all 4 being back. I think it's totally like a 60-40 type thing, I guess, probably. I have a really hard time gauging what this offseason is going to look like for the Raptors, if I'm being totally real. It's a lot of moving parts, and the RJ thing is a really interesting kind of conundrum for them to sort out, I think, because I think there's a lot of sentimental reasons why they want him around, and I can't fault them for any of them, frankly. I just wonder how they negotiate the tax stuff and all that. And again, the draft lottery in a week is going to really, I think, dictate how a lot of these things go, right? Like, that's the first domino to fall, and that's going to decide which track the dominoes take, right? If they go and get themselves a Dylan Harper, a Cooper Flag, and they jump up to 1 or 2 on lottery night, I think a lot of their problems become less problematic. I think it becomes a lot easier to just kind of figure things out. Maybe these trades become a little easier to line up or sell to yourself or justify to yourself, all of that. But I do think they just need more guys who are large, is kind of what it comes down to. They're a very 6'5" and under skewed team. The NBA is going big. You've got Scottie, you've got Poeltl, you've got Ingram. I think they need a couple more guys in that front court mix who can just, again, elongate lineups for you, give you some size, give you some length. And I think, with that, you'll sort of bolster the defensive momentum, the defensive start we saw the team make this year. I think that only gets easier to, carry forward if you can go get some more size and length and guys who are defense coded in exchange for some of your less defense coded guards and just like smaller guys that you have, right? So that's where we're at. Roster balance, a big man of some persuasion, some shot creation. Those feel like the biggest needs to me. We'll get into some more, obviously, as we head towards the draft lottery next week. We'll get some draft stuff later this week. We'll get Jakob back on. We'll have some fun with some topic, one or another. And then once we hit the draft, it'll be really into overdrive from there. We'll do full-on deep dives on all the prospective guys, wherever the Raptors end up picking. We'll bring in experts. We'll talk to them, pick their brains, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to get fun here as the lottery draws near. In the meantime, thanks so much for checking out the show. Please follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend. Always appreciate when you support the show, however it is you choose to do so. Makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. You're all the best. Thank you. We'll talk to you again on Tuesday with another episode of Locked On Raptors. Thanks for hanging. Bye-bye. Oh, almost 2 in a row.